It was a quiet evening in a small diner on the edge of town. The kind of place where everyone kept to themselves, a sanctuary for those seeking solitude. A lone man sat at a corner table, nursing a cup of coffee and staring out the window. He was dressed simply, blending into the background, the kind of person you wouldn't give a second glance. But what no one in the diner knew was that this seemingly unremarkable customer had a past that would soon come into play in ways no one could have anticipated. As the door swung open, a group of rowdy individuals barged in, their loud voices cutting through the calm like a knife. They were looking for trouble, and it wasn't long before they set their sights on the man in the corner. To them, he looked like easy prey, someone they could intimidate and humiliate for fun. But they couldn't have been more wrong. The tension in the room began to build as the group approached his table, their mocking laughter echoing off the walls. Everyone else in the diner avoided eye contact, silently hoping the situation wouldn't escalate. The man remained calm, his expression unreadable, as if he'd seen this kind of thing 100 times before. What happened next would leave everyone in the diner speechless. They had no idea who they were dealing with, a retired cop with years of training, a sharp mind, and instincts honed by decades of experience. The quiet man was about to show these would-be bullies why they had chosen the wrong target. The leader of the group, a tall man with a cocky grin and an air of arrogance, leaned over the table where the quiet man sat. "Hey, old-timer," he sneered, his voice loud enough for everyone in the diner to hear. "You're sitting in our spot. Why don't you move before things get unpleasant?" The man didn't flinch. He calmly took another sip of his coffee, his steady gaze fixed on the group without a trace of fear. The leader's grin faltered slightly, but he quickly recovered, his friends laughing behind him, urging him on. "Didn't you hear me?" The leader barked, slamming his hand on the table. The sound echoed, making a few patrons jump. Still, the man didn't react. He placed his mug down gently, his movements deliberate, as if he were in no rush. "You should reconsider," the man said in a low, even tone. His voice was calm, but there was a weight to it, a quiet authority that seemed to hang in the air. The group's laughter faltered for a moment before their leader leaned in closer. "Reconsider? You've got some nerve, old man." He reached out, grabbing the man's collar in a show of dominance. That was when everything changed. In a blur of motion too fast for anyone to process, the man grabbed the leader's wrist and twisted it. The leader let out a sharp yelp as he was forced to his knees, his expression contorted with pain. The quiet man hadn't even stood up, he remained seated, his grip firm but controlled. "Let me give you some advice," the man said, his voice steady. "Don't pick fights you can't win." The group stared in stunned silence, their bravado crumbling as they watched their leader helpless against the man they had underestimated. The diner, which had been filled with murmurs and whispers moments ago, was now deathly quiet. But instead of retreating, one of the others, emboldened by adrenaline or perhaps embarrassment, lunged forward with a clenched fist. The man released the leader and rose to his feet in one smooth motion, sidestepping the attack effortlessly. Before the attacker could process what was happening, he found himself disarmed and immobilized, pinned against the counter. The patrons couldn't believe what they were witnessing. It was like watching a professional in action, every movement calculated and precise. But who was this man? As the group hesitated, torn between fleeing and saving face, the leader struggled to his feet. His arrogance was replaced with a mixture of fear and anger. "You're gonna regret this," he spat, rubbing his wrist. "You have no idea who you're messing with." The man's expression didn't waver. "Neither do you," he replied simply. Unbeknownst to everyone, a young woman sitting in the back corner of diner had quietly started recording the scene on her phone. She had recognized something in the man's demeanor, a confidence and composure that hinted at a lifetime of training. The way he handled himself wasn't just skill, it was instinct. She had a feeling this was a story worth sharing. As the tension mounted, diner owner, a middle-aged man with a nervous demeanor, stepped out from behind the counter. "Please," he pleaded, his voice shaking. "Let's not have any trouble here. I don't want to call the cops." The group exchanged uneasy glances. They didn't want the police involved, but they also didn't want to walk away with their tails between their legs. The leader, still nursing his injured pride, tried to save face. "This isn't over," he growled, pointing a finger at the man. "You'll regret this." The man didn't respond. He simply returned to his seat, picking up his coffee as if nothing had happened. The group lingered for a moment longer before finally retreating, muttering curses under their breath as they stormed out of the diner. As the door swung shut behind them, the tension in the room began to dissipate. Conversations slowly resumed, though they were now laced with hushed speculation about who the mysterious man might be. The young woman with the phone hesitated before approaching his table. "Excuse me," she said softly. "I couldn't help but notice the way you handled that situation. Are you in law enforcement or something?" The man looked up at her, his expression unreadable. "Not anymore," he said simply. Before she could ask anything else, the sound of screeching tires filled the air. Everyone turned toward the window as a car sped past the diner, its occupants shouting something unintelligible. The group wasn't done yet. They were regrouping, and it was clear they were planning to escalate things. The man sighed, setting his mug down again. "Stay inside," he told the young woman as he stood and walked toward the door. "What are you going to do?" she asked, her voice trembling with both fear and curiosity. He paused, glancing back at her with a faint smile. "What I was trained to do." As he stepped outside into the cold night, the air in the diner grew thick with anticipation. No one knew what was about to happen, but one thing was certain: this quiet man was far more than he appeared. And the night was far from over. The cold night air hit him as he stepped outside, his boots crunching against the gravel. The car had pulled up a few yards away, its headlights cutting through the darkness and illuminating the tense scene. The group was back, but this time they weren't alone. Two more men had joined them, their expressions grim and their intentions clear. Inside the diner, the patrons watched with bated breath, their faces pressed against the glass. The young woman had her phone still recording, her hands trembling slightly. The quiet man, however, stood calm and composed, his posture unyielding as the group spilled out of the car. "So, this is how you want to play it," the leader called out, his voice carrying an edge of desperation masked by bravado. He flexed his wrist, still sore from earlier, and motioned for his companions to surround the man. "You had your fun, but now we settle this." The man didn't respond. His silence was unnerving, a stark contrast to the group's bluster. It was as though he was weighing each of them, calculating the risks and anticipating their moves. "You should walk away," he finally said, his voice steady. "This won't end the way you think it will." His words only fueled their anger. The leader snarled, "You don't tell us what to do." He signaled, and two of his men rushed forward. What followed was a masterclass in precision and control. The man sidestepped the first attacker, using his momentum against him to send him sprawling to the ground. The second barely had time to react before finding himself disarmed and incapacitated with a single well-placed strike. Inside the diner, the crowd erupted into murmurs of astonishment. The young woman couldn't believe what she was capturing on her phone. It wasn't just skill, it was artistry. Every movement was deliberate, every action efficient. The remaining men hesitated, their confidence shaken. But the leader wasn't ready to back down. He pulled a knife from his pocket, the blade glinting in the light. "Think you're tough?" he snarled. "Let's see how you handle this." The man's eyes narrowed, but his calm demeanor didn't waver. "Put it down," he said, his voice taking on a sharper edge. "You're only making this worse for yourself." The leader ignored the warning, lunging forward with reckless aggression. The man moved like a shadow, sidestepping the blade and twisting the leader's arm in one fluid motion. The knife clattered to the ground, and the leader cried out as he was forced to his knees once again. "Enough," the man said firmly, his voice carrying a weight that silenced the night. "Walk away. Now." This time, the leader didn't argue. He nodded frantically, his bravado completely shattered. The man released him, and he scrambled back toward the car, his friends following close behind. Without another word, they sped off into the night, leaving behind a diner full of stunned witnesses. The man turned back toward the diner, brushing off his jacket as he walked inside. The room erupted into applause, but he didn't seem to acknowledge it. He returned to his seat, picked up his coffee, and took a sip as though nothing had happened. The young woman approached him cautiously, her phone still in hand. "That was incredible," she said, her voice filled with awe. "Who are you?" He looked at her for a long moment before answering. "Just someone who believes in doing the right thing." "But you're more than that," she pressed. "You're not just some random guy. You've had training, haven't you?" He sighed, setting his mug down. "I was a cop," he admitted. "Retired now. But some habits are hard to break." The revelation sent a ripple through the room. Whispers spread as the pieces fell into place. The way he had handled the situation, his calm demeanor, his refusal to escalate it all made sense now. "What made you leave?" the young woman asked softly. He hesitated, his expression darkening slightly. "It's a long story," he said. "But let's just say, sometimes the system doesn't make it easy to do the right thing." She nodded, sensing there was more to the story than he was willing to share. "Well, whatever brought you here tonight, I'm glad you were," she said sincerely. He gave her a small nod, his eyes softening. "Me too." As the night wore on, the diner slowly returned to normal, though the air was still buzzing with the events that had unfolded. The young woman uploaded the video she had taken, her caption simple but impactful: "The quiet hero we didn't see coming." Within hours, the video went viral, sparking conversations about bravery, justice, and the quiet strength of those who stand up for what's right. The man's anonymity didn't last long, but he handled the attention with the same grace and humility he had shown in the diner. For the patrons who had witnessed it all firsthand, that night became a story they would tell for years to come, a reminder that heroes don't always wear capes, and sometimes the quietest among us are the strongest of all. As for the man, he continued to live his quiet life, content with his coffee and solitude, knowing that when it mattered most, he had made a difference.